Hi, folks. You're listening to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Andy Chaplin, and Neil Geddes Ward. And Neil, I believe we've got quite a familiar face coming on the show today.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to dive straight into this one. We're not going to have our normal pre-show waffle. We actually have our guest, and you can see him there if you're listening on YouTube. It's Mark Johnson, producer of the Paranormal UK Radio flagship show, and he also runs the Paranormal UK Radio network along with Irene. So welcome, Mark, to our little show in the corner of Paranormal UK Radio land.
Well, thank you, Neil and Andrew, for having me on. It's great to finally be on your guys' show for a change. I know we've had on our show.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of more practiced at it now, so we feel a bit more confident in asking the more experienced hosts like yourself bigger questions and things. So we've just been talking about the weather before we came in, and everyone's a bit roasted and toasted today. I mean, we've got a bit of a heat wave going on over here. Andy's just sort of been in a car wash by the looks of things.
Well, I'm on a bit kind of like festival today. So I've got a festival local to me called Stand and Calling, which I hope is still going ahead, but it very much depends on Boris's decision. So whether it goes ahead or not, I'm dressed for a festival, so I'm ready to go.
You look very psychedelically festival. That really is very tie and dye and everything. Yeah. Yeah. So, and you're hot over there, Mark? You got some nice weather, or is...
Well, we have nice weather now. I think you guys have our heat wave from last week. I live in northern New Jersey, so I'm just an hour outside of New York City. But we had really, really hot days last week, and now it's cooled down into the 70s, and it's beautiful weather, and I am not going to complain.
Excellent. And you also get a lot of snow over there.
Hopefully you guys will cool off here. You'll get this in the next few days.
Yeah. We're kind of doing a part exchange.
We got thunderstorms coming, Neil. Have you seen that?
I have heard of that. I was expecting it today, but nothing's come along. So far.
Next couple of days coming up. Big ones.
That'll keep the dog awake. We always get a sound night's sleep with thunderstorms and dogs barking. Crikey. Anyway, we're crack on then. So Mark, welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show in our little monthly show that we put out, because I know you guys are really busy putting out your weekly show at the Paranormal UK Radio Network flagship show. So I thought we'd ask you the questions like for instance, how did you? This is what we tend to ask our guests. How did you get into all of this kind of paranormal stuff?
Well, the paranormal stuff I've been interested in since I was a kid. I mean, when I was in what we call elementary school, when I was young, 7, 8 years old, we didn't have a library on our school campus. We had what was called a bookmobile, a traveling library that would come maybe once a month. And every month it would come, I would always check out the same 2 books that they had on ghosts, because I was always fascinated with it. And it had some of the famous ghost photos, like the Brown Lady from the 1930s and other ghost photos. And so I was always interested in it. And it wasn't until I was in high school, I was about 17 years old, my brother and we watched a program. It was a documentary made in the late 70s called The Amazing World of Psychic Phenomenon. And there was a section in there about this researcher who was going around to cemeteries with a big reel-to-reel tape recorder, tape recording graves. And he would, of course, every few graves or whatever, he would get voices. So being teenage boys, we decided, that sounds great. Let's go do it. Grabbed a tape recorder. And there was an old pioneer cemetery where I grew up in Los Angeles. I was up north in the San Fernando Valley, and there was this old cemetery that goes back to the 1800s. So we took our tape recorders, started putting on graves, tape recording, and this was in broad daylight in the afternoon. We weren't out there at night. Got nothing. At one point, we went back to the corner of the cemetery, and there was a grave with a missing headstone. But it was unusual because it had a cement slab over the top. So it was almost like a submerged crypt rather than a burial. So we recorded. We would stand a few feet away. There's nobody else around. Clear line of sight. And then after we recorded, we went back, played the tape back. We're listening. And all of a sudden, we hear a voice. And it's very soft and whispering. So we had to play it back again, turn up the volume. And it was a woman or a young woman or older girl's voice, young woman's voice. And she whispered, "I'm dead. Help me. Well, needless to say, this friend of ours from next door who was with us wanted to run out of there right then and there. And me, being who I am, I'm going, oh no, we've got to catch more. So we put it back on the grave and record it again. And then I come after several minutes, I come back and rewind it and play it. And what's fascinating is it was those old fashioned, cassette recorders, mechanical analog recorders. And when you press down the record button, you actually pick up the clicking of the buttons. So when it starts, then you hear my footsteps walking away. And just as my footsteps walk away, this same young woman's voice, clear as day, as loud as I'm talking to you now, says, "It isn't finished." And what I found interesting about the sound quality is it sounded like it was in an enclosed room. It had a slight reverberation to the sound quality. Now, this was back before computers, back before you could sit there and analyze the frequencies of an audio recording. And the term EVP had not even been invented yet. So this was fascinating to me. And we'd go around, we'd try to play it for our friends, whatever. Some would kind of believe it. Most didn't believe it. My parents didn't believe it. But then I never really played around with it again. I was interested, but I was going through my religious phase back then, and I started thinking I was messing with something I shouldn't, so I put it aside. Well, the religious phase all went out the window in my 20s. And then it was shortly after I moved here to New Jersey in the fall of 99, I moved into a house that had activity. And I would hear my name being called at times. I would feel presences in the room. I would hear noises. So I had a super VHS camera and didn't have night vision. It was just a regular light camera, but I started recording. Sure enough, I started catching these anomalies that were not dust. They, half the time you see the little ball of orb float in front of the lens, and you can almost always dismiss it as, a piece of dust floating in front of the lens, reflecting off the camera light. No, I would catch a bright orb coming out of the wall at the very back of the room, about 25 feet away, and it started meandering towards me, coming across the floor, snaking around, and strobing like this with light as it would go past me. Another time I was recording and I was sitting there, and this fast moving object goes shooting right past the camera lens. So I adjust the lens and I'm looking over, and there's this rocking chair across the room. All of a sudden, this thing that I can only describe like a tadpole, it had a bulbous head that came down to a tail. It was about this big, flew out from under the rocking chair and went rocketing past me into the kitchen. It happened so fast I wasn't even sure what I caught until I went back and rewound the tape. And I saw this and I'm going, what in the hell is this?
I remember you sending me that clip.
Yes.
I remember looking at it. Yeah.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
And so I started doing research on the internet, and I found a local group who happened to be in my town. So I invited them over. We did an investigation. They caught another similar anomaly like that. I got so fascinated, I got hooked. So I joined them, and I started paranormal investigating, and I was with them for a couple of years. And then I broke off and formed my own group, which I ran for about 10 or 12 years, North Jersey Paranormal Research. And we investigated dozens of homes and businesses and historical sites, all of not just in New Jersey, but in the surrounding areas as well. So
is there anyone that you could put that clip online, Mark, for anyone that's interested that might want to see that? Is there anything you can upload it to?
Actually, yeah, I have it uploaded. I'll just have to I have it my YouTube channel. I have the link, so I can send that link to you later.
We can probably drop it in, for those that are interested, or put a link as well in the final YouTube version of this. When you did your later paranormal investigations in your own group, was you called upon to try and sort people's problems out, or someone just said, look, there's some noises coming, listen, they didn't give two hoots about, they weren't scared or anything, they just thought you might be interested, or did people say, look, I've got a problem, can you sort me out something?
It depended on the case. in the beginning, it was people reaching out because they were frightened. They didn't know what they were dealing with. They were afraid they were dealing with something negative. They'd call us in, and this was just before the ghost hunting shows started, before Ghost Hunters came in, and then Paranormal State, and then now we have a million different ghost shows. And we would go in with the equipment and record audio, video. We take measurements with EMF meters. We do all the things that they do in the shows. And then we would present the evidence afterwards and give our impressions. And sometimes, hey, we didn't find a thing. And we would try to find a rational explanation for it. Sometimes we would catch some incredible evidence. But one of the things that I started becoming a little disillusioned with is the fact that, just like most of these TV shows, I kind of got away from it. This is why the group kind of faded away a few years ago, and I haven't really been out there yet because I felt like we weren't really helping people, because most of these groups go into these homes just like the television show go, oh, we got to get in, we got to help these people. Well, the truth is they go in, they stir stuff up, they record, they capture some good evidence, they hand it to the client, here you go, see you later, bye.
Yeah,
people are still there and they still have to deal with it. And I started to not like that, and we didn't have anybody that we could work with, like a legitimate psychic or somebody that could help, whatever it was, cross over, provide a good explanation. I mean, sometimes we would find things that were benevolent, that weren't going to cause any trouble. People just could get used to it. But we still weren't in a position to cross anything over or handle it or try to quell it in any way. We were just coming in purely from an equipment point of view. And I started to get soured on that. And I started changing my approach and started using, I'm not psychic. I don't claim to be psychic, but I do sometimes get impressions, and I have had things happen on investigations. So I started trusting my own body and my instincts. If something popped into my head, I didn't just dismiss it, because I would find out later sometimes that information was correct. And so, I mean, as far as the cases go and the people, some people were dealing with some very legitimate, extreme haunting situations. Nothing I would call negative or demonic, but also I dealt with too many people who've watched one too many paranormal shows and were convinced they had a demon in the house.
There seems to have been like a shift in direction, Mark. So, for instance, like the classic Most Haunted in Britain, which was kind of one of the forerunners, was very much about Derek Acorah, the medium, and everything revolved around him. And then over the years, it's kind of drifted away from using psychics and mediums and more reliant on things like tools and equipment and EVP cameras and EVP recordings and night vision cameras, etc. And they veered away from like the spiritual side, the spirituality side. And as you say, they go in there with the stick, they rattle up the hornet's nest, and then they disappear. And that kind of irks me as well, actually. And I think maybe they should drift back more into seeing it as a spiritual thing, and maybe, as you say, using ourselves, our own human bodies, as the best tool to use in a haunted situation.
I totally agree. In fact, again, where I stand today, and I've done a couple of investigations these last couple of years, but not as many as I used to. I took a break, and now I want to get back into it. But I'm coming in from a very different approach. It's from a very spiritual angle. I mean, I still think equipment can play a part in helping to validate. I especially love audio recordings and EVP. I think that's some of the best evidence that we can capture doing an investigation. Video can be good, but sometimes it's also problematic, because you have to weed out what's a false anomaly or what's real. And it doesn't matter. You could have the best looking video clip in the world, but you could put that online and you're going to have a million people tearing you apart, because everybody wants to be a debunker and say, oh, that's fake or that's not real. So, we're not in a position to provide any real proof. And I'm not inclined to go out and investigate to provide any kind of proof to anybody anymore. It's more for me to learn. It's one of the things that with doing these radio shows for these last several years and talking to people like yourselves and experiencers and other people that I've been learning so much, and my whole view of the phenomena in general has completely changed. It's like a new paradigm. And
What can you expand on that, Mark? Like what, for instance, what beliefs did you have in the past that have changed, and what have they changed to, and why?
Well, I'll just use the example, like most paranormal groups out there, or even the groups you see on the television shows, they all come in from the perspective of what I call the Victorian era of spiritualism. Okay. They all repeat the same thing. In fact, they're all regurgitating what they've heard on other television shows or what other paranormal investigators. Oh, a ghost is the spirit of someone who's died. Maybe they don't know they're dead, or maybe they're afraid to cross over and they're haunting a location. And then some of them are causing trouble, or then you'll get a demon coming in and causing trouble. And I have, that's not to say that doesn't happen, but it's, in my opinion, a lot less likely, or happens less often than people realize, because I'm starting to realize that our nature of reality is far different than what we think it is. We've all been trained to think a certain way. And seeing or experiencing this paranormal activity, you can have poltergeist-like activity in your house. That doesn't mean you have a ghost in your house. There could be a number of different phenomenon causing that. You could see what looks like the apparition of a person. And I'll use an example, Irene as an example, because she had a great story of when she and her husband were looking at this house in London that they were going to buy. And she went upstairs to the bedroom by herself to check it out. When she walked in, there was this woman standing there in like Edwardian style maid's clothing or servant's clothing. And the woman looked at her, Irene looked at her, and both their jaws dropped in shock. And then the woman vanished. Now, if you talk to most investigators, they'll go, she saw a spirit of someone who doesn't realize they've died, and they're still going around doing their daily work. And I don't believe that quite anymore. Based on that reaction, and based on what we're starting to learn with more advanced science and theories like string theory, ideas of time being different, multiple dimensions, I think that in a case like that, you're dealing with something called a time slip. And I think in that case, you're dealing with Irene, and this ghost was not a ghost, but an actual living, breathing human being who just happened to be occupying a different space and time. And those two time periods blended and merged simultaneously. So they probably each thought they saw a ghost, but they were actually both living people. And I think a lot of times when people see an apparition that seems to walk through a wall that later you find out was a doorway, I think a lot of what they call residual hauntings can be summed up with this. They call it the stone tape theory, where depending on what you have on your ground, like granite or quartz or limestone, it stores up energy, and plays over and over again like a tape recorder. Yet I don't think people fully understand how it works. And I think how it works is it's playing with time. It's not that there's an event imprinted in time and playing over and over linearly. Time itself isn't linear. We're finding that all time is happening at once. And it's our perception of time, the way these hunks of meat up here in our brains work, we interpret time linearly. When in fact, if it's all happening at once, then it's easier to understand how these things can blend over and our perceptions change to a point where we're seeing an event that we think happened in the past, but is actually happening right now, just in another frame of time.
There used to be an effect on the TV when you got stormy weather, and it's more analog TV than digital TV. And you would sometimes get a blending of stations, like the BBC would ghost over to the independent TV station or your commercial TV station, ITV as we have it here, and you'd see the newsreader sort of literally appearing over the screen of them. And really, that's almost an analogy of what you're saying in a sense. And the term was called ghosting by the engineers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in other words, they weren't seeing a dead guy appearing in their room. They were just seeing someone else doing their own show on another channel, on another frequency, in another location, on another subject. And they were unaware of each other, but us as viewers could perceive them both. And almost you could draw parallels with what you're describing to a certain extent, I'd imagine, except in Irene's case, both the maid and Irene saw each other, which was quite an interesting take on it.
Well, with that, it's just like you said, those two stations merge simultaneously, and it's kind of fuzzy. Person was see-through, so she wasn't 100% solid. So it's like those two radio frequencies that overlap, and television stations overlap, and you get that ghosting effect.
Yeah.
You also got to wonder, like, how much of ghost hunting is actual creating what they're looking for in the first place. So, for instance, I have this similar point of view, Mark, that not everywhere you go has got demonic activity, but you've got all of these ghost shows saying, oh, there's a demon here, there's a demon there. But if they're going in with the mindset that that is what is there and that is what they're looking for, are they actually coming across something that is there, or are they creating that for themselves?
Well, I'll point out and I have to admit, it's my guilty pleasure favorite ghost show, which is Ghost Adventures.
Yeah.
And they come in and they've spent the last, they've been on like 15 years now, but they've spent a majority of their time looking for the most extreme and negative hauntings. And they always called demons, and they brought in exorcists to perform exorcisms and whatnot. And I don't believe in demons per se. Now, that's not saying I don't believe there's some nasty stuff out there, but from a Christian standpoint or a mainstream religious standpoint, I don't believe in them. I think there's a lot of other explanations and a lot of other things that we're dealing with. But, they come into it with that preconceived notion and from a very religious standpoint. But I also think that because of all the investigations they've done, they've picked up so many attachments. Half the time, I think they're bringing stuff with them. It's not only just because of their preconceptions, but they get so much activity in all these shows. And it's one of the few shows that I actually believe almost everything they show is legit. They're not faking anything, like Ghost Hunters was caught faking things early in their series. But I don't always agree with their interpretation. They'll play some garbled EVP and try to tell you what it's saying, and I'm going, I don't hear that at all. But I know that most of the cast members have had things follow them home, have had things attached to them, and cause problems with them. And when they go to these locations, especially when they're dealing with some of the more extreme hauntings, I think that their attachments are just following right along with them and putting on a show.
Yeah. Following on from that, Mark, I don't know if you watch the British Most Haunted at all.
Oh yes, I'm very with it.
So one thing that you got to take it with a pinch of salt. There are some dodgy parts that you think maybe they faked that. And I think
Carl being dragged up the stairs.
I can't remember specifically, but there's certainly some. I'll tell you one, for instance, where the camera appears to dip and then the stone gets kind of thrown across the room. So it's almost like the cameraman has kind of like gone like that, thrown a stone, but who knows? But my main point with Most Haunted is they always seem to get, wherever they go, they get like this knocking sound. They get this kind of like, I don't know if you can hear that.
Yeah.
They get consistent knocking. Now, the thing is, right, either everywhere they go, there's some kind of like ghostly karmic law where ghosts have to knock to communicate, or as you say, they've got some kind of attachment where the same thing is going around. Because I just can't believe that every single venue that they go, all of the spirits and the ghosts there know that they have to knock, because that's ridiculous.
Yeah. So it's either one of two things. Either they're faking it.
Yeah.
And I've unfortunately have had dealings with television shows that have faked things. Not too happy with them. Paranormal State, I'm looking at you. But they also could be, again, who's to say, if let's say it is legitimate, who's to say that what they're not just bringing it with them, and it's the same thing that's attached to them and doing the same thing every single time.
Yeah,
That's a possibility.
Bit like a tulpa.
this is it. This is what I'm thinking. This is
Either a tulpa or a different type of entity that has attached itself to one or more of the crew and follows them around from investigation to investigation. And because they're going to these places and asking for things to happen, unlike going home and living your life and waiting for the next episode, you're actually asking for evidence. You're asking for something to communicate with you. And then, of course, it's happy to oblige.
And then carry on. I think I'm right in saying that Yvette Fielding, like the main lady that hosts Most Haunted, actually stopped doing it for a while because she was having so much activity at home. I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere.
Yeah, I read that too. But I heard otherwise because they kept getting razzed so much for faking evidence that they went off the air for a while, but then they came back on with a vastly reduced budget. I've seen a couple of the newer shows and the quality's really gone downhill. But they're about the same, and how often can you, as someone who's trying to seriously investigate the paranormal, run out of a room screaming?
Yeah.
There's some dramatic for television, but
there's some dodgy crossovers, isn't there? Because in the Enfield poltergeist case, you've got on record the naughty little girls there that the focus of the poltergeist attention were faking and hoaxing some things because they were just naughty little girls. However, I don't think the entire case was completely fraudulent because there were press people, there were magicians that they brought in, there was police officers that gave witness testimony to some proper weird poltergeist things going on. But because the girls were faking it, the whole thing kind of get cast into disrepute. Even the spiritualist movement, the Fox sisters were faking it to begin with. So the whole thing is absolutely fraught with it.
Well, the Fox sisters, that wasn't that's not the same sisters who did the Coddington Fairies, was it?
No, that's the Fox sisters started spiritualism in Hydesville.
Okay.
In the 1800s or something. Yeah,
I remember them now. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a whole controversy at the time because there were, the spiritualist movement in the Victorian era, there were hoaxers. There were people with ectoplasm that was cloth, shoved down their throats. And there were people coming out of cupboards. And, I think some people kind of like put the lights on quickly and found that, it was the medium that was supposed to be tied to the chair, up and about, blowing trumpets.
I can offer a kind of counterpart to that explanation. And it's something that I had read years ago and I actually retried it to see if it still worked. Now, many, many years ago, I got this book on how to channel your spirit guides by a lady called Catherine Riddle, and she was a psychologist. And it gave all the instructions on how to go into a trance and produce the voice phenomena, etc., etc. And I thought, oh, this sounds cool. I'll do it. I was only 23 at the time, so let's get into this stuff, And I was reading through it. Now, one of the things it said towards the end of the book, as you kind of come into the culmination of about to do this thing, was it said, if nothing happens, start to speak as if you're the spirit guide. I thought, why do that? So you start to answer your own questions in trance. And basically, the analogy I come up with is like you're trying to bump start your car. You can't get your car started, so you push it down the road. But no one's meant to push their cars down the road because the cars are meant to drive themselves. But when you push the car, it turns over the starter mode, and hey presto, it gets going. And I think what this was an attempt to do was psychologically bump start your psyche or whatever, and then the spirit latches onto the flywheel and grabs it and goes with it. Now, we tried this many years later here at this house, doing a Ouija board. And I said to my girlfriend, okay, it's not working. Let's try this technique that I read about 30 plus years ago. So I said, let's just ask questions and let's push the glass around. And we pushed it around, and 10 minutes later, hey presto, the glass started to move around under its own steam and started to give information. So maybe some of the accounts of people faking it, maybe yes, it might have been, but also possibly it could have been people trying a similar technique to bump start the seance.
I see what you mean, Neil, and I would actually kind of agree with that completely, because I actually did a mind body spirit fair this past Sunday, and when I was doing my readings, the most difficult reading is when you're starting from absolutely zilch and nothing, and the person's not saying anything. Now, I don't want to do cold readings, and I don't want to kind of get information from them and reel it back to them. That's not what it's about. But if they're completely sat there, completely blank still, and not even talking about anything, it's very difficult to tune in. So what I find is when I'm doing readings like that, I want to get some kind of conversation going, even if it's about the weather, even if it's have they had a good journey here. For some reason, once you start talking, then stuff starts coming.
Yes.
And I think right, it's kind of like spirit or the psychic or whatever latches on or kind of flows with.
It's something to do with the voice. I've noticed this when I've done readings for people myself.
Yeah.
And as soon as I've tried to do a reading using a photograph in an envelope, not getting much, but as soon as someone starts talking to me, bang, I start to get information through. And as long as that voice, and this is why mediums say, come on, I need to hear your voice. I need to hear your voice. Because that seems to be like the carrier way for the signals to come through. So yeah, it's a bit of to and froing, but it seems to like warm the whole thing up. And let's face it, you know, when you do a comedy show on TV, before they actually do the recording, they bring a person in as a warm-up guy, don't they, to get the audience all rolled up with that energy. And I suppose, in a sense, maybe we're kind of doing something similar to that to warm us all up, get all our psychic energies. In the same way, in a spiritualist church, they want everyone to sing their hymns. So, I mean, I saw a number of years ago this medium, and I don't think she should have said this publicly, because it would have been disappointing to the first person that had the first reading. But she would say, okay, here's my first reading. And she goes, I must say, I'm not very good on my first reading, but it takes a while to warm up. And then she gives a reading to someone, and you think, oh, I feel sorry for the person that's being told that, because they know they're not getting as good a quality reading as person number 2 in the queue or something.
Yeah, sure.
They should have just kept it quiet. The Beatles never said, well, you know, we're going to be our crap first song, but we'll warm up by song 3. They don't tell you that. It's unprofessional, you know. A medium should be the same, in my opinion, you know. So, but anyway, we're digressing. So back to Mark.
To comment on that, it makes perfect sense, because everything is energy and vibration. Mm-hmm. So let's say I put up a camera in an empty room, or a recorder in an empty room, and walk away. I have caught evidence that way, but it's more times than often I haven't. But then when people come in the room and then they start talking, there's the voice, the sound coming out is a vibrational wave. Everything is energy, and everything is tuned to certain frequencies. And I agree that those frequencies, the vibrations from our voices, can stimulate those other energies into being able to communicate more, especially if we're dealing with something that's not 100% on this physical plane. Maybe it's just the next frequency over. We need something to help bridge that gap. So talking or playing music or doing something, I mean, look, and even in Native American cultures, you know, when the medicine man or shaman is working on for the spirits, they start singing. You know, they'll sing, they'll chant. And what that's doing is the same thing. It's that vibrational energy. It's opening up a portal. It's opening up something that is allowing whatever it is that we're trying to reach out and communicate with, giving it that energy to be able to interact with us.
And this is where rituals, presumably in religion, come from, although people don't understand what they're doing, why they're drinking the water, why they're chucking it all around, why they're throwing the smoke around the Catholic Church. But these are all little rituals, and, you know, it could be that they are psychically stimulating parts of the congregation or the people that are taking part. And that's when they make their connection with whatever they're trying to connect with. Symbolically, it makes people sort of shift their mind a little bit, which is what mediums have to do anyway. Andy, you know about this. You have to kind of shift your awareness a little bit when you're on stage and things like that. So you might have a little ritual that you're even unaware that you're doing, but you might say something to yourself. And what do you do to kind of get out there?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with the rituals thing. For me, it's kind of like I have to change my mindset from one of being flustered and kind of like everyday mindset to like what they call the alpha state. So going into like a meditation. With me, I take like an iPod that shows my age. I've still got it; it still works. Take my iPod, listen to some meditation tracks, get myself really, really, really relaxed. And then actually, kind of when I'm doing my demos, if I've got other mediums, I'll try. It's a bit naughty. I'll try and get them to go first as almost like a warm up, or to kind of like give me enough time to kind of like really meditate and go into like a deep state of relaxation, and then they do their thing, and then I come in and then I do my thing.
Mm,
And I really do think like the carrier wave theory, that's quite a good analogy of using it. Actually, I think carrier wave is exactly it.
And then a lot of mediums and a lot of people who use meditation and trying to alter that state of awareness to out of this physical consciousness, what we consider consciousness, which if you talk to some people who are able to astral travel or being able to really connect with the other side, what we're living in is more of a dream, and what's happening there is more of a reality. Speaking of Native Americans, there was this famous Sioux medicine man, Black Elk. I don't know if you've heard of him. He was actually young, but he was present at the Battle of the Little Bighorn where Custer was killed. But he was also at Pine Ridge Reservation when the U.S. Army came in and massacred the Indians for ghost dancing. But he told his story. It was in this book called Black Elk Speaks. And in there, he talked a couple times about having these. He got sick once and through illness and high fever, and then he had these visions, and these visions were almost seemed biblical. It almost sounded like the way things are explained in the Book of Revelations, how all this different imagery that was happening in front of him, and a lot of it seemed symbolic. But he swore up and down it was more real than our waking life is. And I've heard that from other people too. So it's like, is this the dream state we're living in? Or as some people like to say, we're living in the Matrix?
Yeah. I mean, there's been messages come through various mediums. I think Leslie Flint's circle, where people would speak and you could hear the spirits talking aloud. And quite often they would say that wherever they are now, the spirit world, for example, they said that is much more real to them. It said this is like a faded old dream that one forgets upon wakening. And that's how they view this life. And there is much more sharper in your face kind of reality. So I think we are at a subdued kind of level of frequency, and we're not quite awake yet, and we're just stirring. We're kind of murmuring and slowly awakening into that kind of reality.
You know the UFO Academy, Neil?
Yes, in Watford.
If you're not aware of it, Mark, UFO Academy is like a little group where they meet up in Watford in London or near London, and they talk about obviously kind of things to do with conspiracies, UFO, spirit, and that kind of thing. Their little family group did a Ouija board once. And their experience was actually quite positive. It wasn't kind of like dark and demonic. Basically, the spirits came through and they basically said that the way that the spirit world views human life, it's almost like we're living in a goldfish bowl and we're the goldfish. And our existence is really only what we see in the goldfish bowl, and we're not aware of what's beyond that. They didn't expand much beyond that, but it was that was the general gist of it.
Well, I'll use another analogy is visible light. We, with our eyes, can only see a sliver of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. That's what we see as visible light. But if you head out in one direction, you go all the way out into the infrared, or the other direction, all the way out into the ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays, and it's vast, but we only see the little sliver in the middle, and that's our reality. And that's how I view the many different parts of our reality in the universe. Is there's so much out there that we can't see. We used the analogy earlier of television stations or radio stations. They're all playing at once, but you have to be tuned into the one station in order to hear everything and see coherently. But, and then you tune into another station and you hear that station, which could be tuning in either psychically or through meditation, tuning into one of these other frequencies and one of these other realities. It's all sharing the same space as we are, but we're only aware of our own little sliver of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was an analogy that comes to mind is, look, when they send down these submersible submarines right down 7 miles below the Atlantic Ocean, in the dark depths of the ocean, and they shine a light on these little fish that have never seen anything like that, that's looking at them like this robot bloody sub, and they sort of quiver and they light up and they swim away, and they think, what the hell, these fish must think is looking at them, and that must be like us with UFOs or spirits or something like that, and we're trying to scratch our head. I mean, the fish has got a very limited intellect, you would assume, so it can't even contemplate what that was, whereas we're at least trying to sort of grab something and stick it into a frame of reference within our own world. Oh, that's saucer shaped, so it's like a flying saucer. Or as one load of natives called it actually a flying oven. And when this investigator said, why'd you call it a flying oven? And apparently their equivalent of an oven in their jungle where they lived was to dig like a wok shape in the ground. And that was, they said it was like their oven. And they were seeing their oven in the sky. So that segues nicely into UFOs anyway. So let's do UFOs now. So what's your take on UFOs, Mark? And obviously we got this thing coming up at the time of recording where, is it the FBI or the CIA or someone's going to release all these files now?
Well, you want my honest opinion on that? No, they're not.
No, they're not.
and if they do, it's disinformation, because look, they've been releasing over the last couple of years some footage. They admit that there is a military program looking into UFOs. It's like they're feeding us little breadcrumbs, but that's all we're going to get. And they're going to throw up their hands and say, we don't know what it is, even though we all know as researchers how deep and dark the governments and military have been involved with actual, not only UFO research, but dealing with crashes, interacting with aliens, many stories about, like President Eisenhower supposedly meeting aliens at Edwards Air Force Base back in the 50s. The Dulce, New Mexico base, there was a firefight between U.S. personnel, Army personnel, and Greys that they found underground before a truce was finally made. There's all these things that happen, and that's not also to include all the Black Ops projects. There's so many Black Ops projects dealing with this high technology that they don't want the public to know about. They don't want our adversaries to know about it. So do you honestly think they're going to come out and tell everybody, yeah, there's these advanced aliens, they're flying around here, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it? They're not. And if you also look at the general public's reaction to all of this, there is, and I'm not talking about those of us who are already interested in the subject, I mean the general public, nobody's paying attention.
Yeah.
Nobody cares. The average person on the street doesn't even know it's happening. It's only us researchers that are seeing all of this happening. I mean, over here on one of the major news networks on ABC, one of the big nightly news programs, they did a whole segment on UFOs and the military footage, the Tic Tac UFO that they filmed off the coast of California, off the USS Nimitz. And it was one of the first programs ever done that didn't have what a friend of mine calls the snicker factor. They weren't saying it tongue in cheek, rolling eyes, playing X-Files music, how they always used to belittle and put down anybody who would come forward with this type of information. And they took it halfway seriously. But I think it's a deflection because, first of all, now there's so much oversaturation of look at the media and movies, and how many alien invasion movies can you have? People are desensitized to it, and so they don't take it seriously.
Mark, I could put the tinfoil hat on and say that maybe this is deliberate, and maybe the desensitization. What word am I thinking of here?
Desensitize.
Desensitization of the public. could be as a result of something like Project Bluebeam, which would be a fake alien invasion, or would they be have the inklings that there might be an actual real alien invasion?
You know what? The invasion happened thousands of years ago. They're here. They've been here.
I believe that.
They've never gone away. If we're going to have the so-called invasion, like most people think of from the movies, it's definitely going to be a government fabrication in order to scare the hell out of the public and gain more control over the public. I mean, look at COVID.
There's two things that worry me as to why this might be the case. Actually, three things. First of all, we know that Project Bluebeam is something on the cards, possibly. Secondly, we got Werner von Braun on his deathbed talking about the things that would happen that have actually happened in terms of threats against humanity or perceived threats. And he said the final one would be the alien one. And thirdly, what was the third one I was going to say? Lost my train of thought there. I forgot.
Wasn't we going to have an asteroid strike or something? Asteroids hitting the Earth or something? There's going to be a succession of different things. Asteroids and aliens.
I know what it is. The lockdown situation. We kind of know that it's not really all about a virus. Yes, I think there's a virus. Yes, it's a problem. Yes, people are dying. But the whole global lockdown, I think there's something else behind it. And I think that something else is a control grid. And I think that something else is a new world order. Now, what is the New World Order? It is a mindset, a global kind of fascist dictatorship. Why is it happening? Well, we've got to look at secret societies and what they're doing. And what are they doing? They're apparently contacting beings that are beyond this reality, whether they're demons, whether they're dark ETs, whatever you want to call them, and are taking orders from darkness, basically. All we have to look at is things like the Epstein case and all the pedo islands and all the satanic rituals and all that kind of thing that's going on. We are not ruled by light, we are ruled by dark. So I'm wondering if the lockdown situation could it be a pretext to like a total takeover, and who would be taking charge of that if that does happen? That's what worries me.
Yeah, if you want to really look at it, I think the takeover has already happened because of look what they're able to do this last year and dictating to people to stay home and closing businesses. Now, they know they couldn't do it forever because they also can't have the world economy crashing. That's how they make their money. But we've lost so many freedoms since, and I'm going to point right at 9/11, right after 9/11 happened, and then Bush, who's a part of these skull and crossbones societies, and his father, and puts in the Patriot Act, and strips away so many of our freedoms and rights, as well as instilling the surveillance of people. And it's going global, and even countries like China. China scares the hell out of me with what they've come up with their facial recognition technology. They follow you everywhere you go, and then the social credit score system. And they seem like they're slowly trying to implement that over here too, in order to control people. Now, the absolute lunacy that has been happening the last 6 months. I mean, it's actually been happening longer than that, but since the current administration got in over here, illegally, in my opinion, since they've been in charge, it's like the lunatics have been let out of the asylum, and everything that they seem to be doing is destabilizing and changing society and canceling out and silencing anyone who dares speak against it. Or anyone who even wants to have a rational conversation about it. You can't even have a rational conversation without being labeled as a racist or you're white, so your opinion doesn't matter because you're a racist and you're an oppressor and all this crazy crap that is going on. And I'm not trying to get too political here because I think this goes beyond just politics. This goes beyond the survival as us as a species and whether we're going to live free or not.
Yeah, and actually, freedom and oppression is a spiritual thing anyway. Politics and spirituality aren't completely, separate areas. We are talking about the rights of people. We're talking about liberties and, fundamental rights of freedom of speech. And I don't know if you saw, Mark, this is absolutely incredible. There's a lady from North Korea who defected from North Korea.
I watched that yesterday.
She went to a top Ivy League US university, and she said, quote, North Korea was crazy, but not as crazy as this. This is coming from somebody who lived under Kim Jong-un. It's just mind-blowing what is happening over there.
I watched her interview. Yes. Yeah. And, if you want to, I know this is off the subject of UFOs, and we'll get back to it, but I've talked with a lot of mediums or people, UFO abductees, experiencers, or channelers, and there's a universal opinion that what we're seeing right now is the death throes of our current situation, or where humanity has been up till now. There's a shift or a change coming, and all this craziness that's happening right now is like the last desperate grasp of power and control, and we're going to be dragged kicking and screaming literally into the next phase of our reality. Now, what that's going to be, I don't know. I mean, I've heard so many different things from different people. We're supposedly going to transition to the fifth dimension or vibrational rate. We become it's almost like a new Earth. I don't know, but it's supposedly all going to change for the better. But you got to go through the worst of it before things get better. And supposedly that's where we are right now. Let's see where we are in 6 months from now.
There are some chinks of light, actually, Mark, and I will promote this. There's a new channel on Sky, believe it or not, in the United Kingdom called GB News, Great Britain News. On Sky, it's on 515, but it's elsewhere. This is apparently the anti-woke news channel. And I've watched it, and it's very amateurish, and there's a lot of gaffes, and the sound people should be fired because there's a lot of guests they have where the sound doesn't kick in for 10 seconds. And it is very clumsy, but do you know what? It's not woke. And it is an absolute breath of fresh air from the BBC and Channel 4 and ITV and all of those regular news networks where you're only getting one point of view, which is far left liberalism, wokeism. And to see GB News in all its clunky glory, it's absolutely fascinating. And I hope they eclipse and dwarf mainstream channels. That would be a dream of mine.
Well, it can only get better.
It's like over here, we have one station who in the past, I have to admit, they've had their own problems with pushing a far right propaganda. But right now, they're the only ones talking any sense is Fox News over here, because all of the other stations over here are so insanely far left. And their reporting of everything happening politically right now is a joke compared to the hysterics they were going into for 4 years when Trump was in office and accusing him of everything. And now Biden's doing things even worse, and they're going, "Oh, well, look at his favorite flavor of ice cream." It's this humanity double standard, and you know what? I'm like firmly in the middle. Okay, I lean a little bit right, I lean a little bit left. It all depends, if it comes down to social issues, if we can talk about things rationally and come up with real solutions to things, because I'm certainly not all for capitalism, because I think capitalism has gotten us in some really bad situations here in the West. But you can't go the other way either, because we've seen what an utter disaster that is, trying to control masses of people and telling them what to do and taking away their lives and livelihood. There has to be something a little bit different. But part of the problem is we also deal with greed and lust for power, and which happens in both spectrums of the political spectrum. So you have to take a step back and look at things from a more spiritual perspective and look at things on an individual basis. and not worry so much. And that's something I have a hard time with, is making myself take a step back and not get upset by everything I'm seeing going on in the world, and realize all I can do is my part, be positive, and focus on the spiritual aspects of things and ride it out.
I think you're right, and I think that how the politics side of things does kind of cross between the spiritual side of things is that I think you're right. I think we're in the death throes of a system that is failing or has failed, and we are quite rapidly and quite with a kick and a bump going to have to rebuild a new society. And I think the reason why you're getting different conflicting opinions from mediums and psychics in terms of the future of humanity is because we're really on a knife edge. We could either end up in Soviet Russia, communist China globally, or a completely euphoric libertarian freedom of speech. Everything's kind of looking after each other, looking after animals, looking after the environment, stop polluting, work with free energy, and all this kind of thing. And I think we're on a knife edge, and it could go both ways. And I think actually another way we could talk about the spirituality side of things from a quantum perspective, I think both realities already exist, both the heaven and the hell reality, and we just need to decide which we want to experience. And I think
maybe we split up and go into both.
This is it.
The many worlds theory.
This is where it gets mind-blowing, Neil, because there could be a Neil that goes into the heaven, and there could be another Neil that experiences the hell part.
Yeah. Well, the higher self would say that's cool because I need to experience dark and light, and I need to have all sides of the oven or whatever. Yeah. We are about to take our break, gentlemen, so we can carry on with this in part 2. So thanks very much for the minute to Mark Johnson of the Paranormal UK Radio Network joining us on the Paranormal Peep Show, and we shall see you in just a minute.
Today's the best day of my life! Woohoo! Listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Hi, welcome back to the Paranormal Peep Show. Myself, Neil Geddes Ward, and regular host Andy Chaplin. And with our special guest, it's Mark Johnson of the Paranormal UK Radio Network flagship show. So that is the show that is responsible for all the other shows that we are part of. So he is the boss. So we've got to be on our bestest behavior tonight. Yeah.
Well, actually, you know what? Irene is actually the boss. So
okay.
Shout out to Irene Allen, who's the founder of the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and she and I do our weekly show, the Paranormal UK Radio Show, which comes out weekly on Wednesdays on our network. And I spoke with Irene during the break, and she wanted me to send her love, and she says she's sending you both a can of baked beans.
I don't know what the connection is with baked beans. I think that's more Andy's thing, but
very, very useful in lockdown. It's a long story, Neil, but she is the baked bean queen. She's queenie.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, whilst we're talking about the Paranormal UK Radio Network, I know that you talked about, and I understand you've done shows in the past like Origins Radio or something like that. How did all the radio thing start with you?
Well, back when I was still in the height of doing my paranormal group, the North Jersey Paranormal Research, I was contacted by a local, and I mean really local, little tiny radio station that wanted to have a paranormal show. And they reached out to us, asked if we were interested, and we said sure. So we started doing a weekly show over there, and then they had, I think, 50 listeners to their entire station. But it was a good start. And then from there, we started branching out, and we went to a couple of different networks, some bigger than others. Eventually, the name of that show was called Unknown Origins Radio. And I did that one for about 5 years. And until we eventually wound up on Art Bell's network, the Dark Matter Digital Network. And we were there until I decided to pull the plug on this show because I was getting a little bored with it. But Irene wanted to do a show, and we wanted to do something that had more of a British slant to it because all the shows were American shows, which is why we started off with the Paranormal UK Radio Show, and then we jumped from there to make the network and invite other shows and people who wanted to make shows like you guys to give a platform for a lot of different paranormal shows, specifically British shows. And because it was like an underrepresented market back at that time when we first started. Now there's a lot more out there, but I still think we're one of the best. And you guys' show is one of my favorites, certainly, that I like listening to. So, yeah, that's how. But, you know, we've been doing the PAUK thing for about 4 or 5 years now, too. So. So
and how did you and Irene come across each other? And obviously being in Britain and America, I suppose it was the internet, wasn't it?
Well, I'll make this a long story very short. We were introduced by someone that Irene was working with in her old group. She used to run a group called Spirit Rescue International. Now, her group was different than most paranormal groups, as they were mostly made out of psychics and some researchers who would virtually help people around the world using psychic abilities and remote viewing, helping people with their issues. I think the farthest away Irene ever worked and did a case was in New Zealand.
Wow. And
this one guy who will remain nameless used to be her number 2. And originally I met him through another friend because he was over here in America, and they invited me. I had him on my radio show, and then he hooked me up with Irene because we seemed to have a lot in common. We hit it off, and we became great friends. Well, unfortunately, this made the other guy jealous. We found out real quickly he was a psychotic narcissist, and he started doing all sorts of really bad, crazy stuff. Let's just leave it at that. And eventually, he stormed off in a huff, thankfully. But ever since then, Irene and I have been working together. So we've been doing not only the radio shows, we had a publishing company for a short period of time. We've done a lot of things in the paranormal. We've researched a lot of things, and we've had a lot of deep discussions because of her connections and her background, which I'll give a plug to her book, Life Among the Spirits, which is her autobiography, talking about growing up. She hates the word psychic, hates it with a passion. She doesn't like being labeled. We call her an extrasensor, just because that's what the heck that means. Because she's has so many various types of things happening around her and throughout her life. So,
and it's ongoing, I understand, as well, Mark, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's ongoing. We're working on a case right now together remotely. So we'll see how that goes. I just started doing that. So yeah, we work together on that, and we do the radio show.
Wow. And it goes from strength to strength because you're getting new shows added every few months with different presenters. And I thought I could keep a tally of it, but now I'm losing track of the number of people that have got different shows out there. But it's the more the merrier, as far as I see, because there's a whole variety of things.
The number of shows we've carried on the network has stayed fairly consistent. We've had people come and then go, and then people leave and new people come in. So
yeah.
You know, and we've had shows that have lasted the test of time. You guys are one of the longest running shows that we have, I think, next to our show. And, you know, so, you know, we have about 10 or 12 shows on the network. And we recently, in this last year, went to the model of, instead of playing shows at a specific time on specific dates, which was really turning into a pain, especially with the time difference between the US and the UK. So we went up with the on-demand model with the podcasts, and then we also have our streaming radio service. So people can go on TuneIn Radio or the Paranormal Radio app that you can download on your phone and find Paranormal UK, and we're streaming 24 hours a day, and new content is added weekly.
Excellent. And it's a brilliant website because you can spin a little globe, which I love doing on the website, to see where all these listeners are. And there are all these little red dots, even in weird places like in the Pacific Islands and things like that. It's quite interesting.
I'll tell you, my favorite, you know, I would check the stats because I like seeing where people are listening to the station as well. And a couple years ago, for about a couple of weeks, we were getting hits out of North Korea.
Oh, wow.
So who's the only person who has internet in North Korea?
Yeah.
How's that happening? Because I thought it was completely insular, completely blocked off internet.
Think about it. Who would be the only person in the country to have internet access?
We're probably his favorite show.
Oh, yeah. Well, He hasn't tuned in a while. I think I said something disparaging about his weight, so I'm probably on a death list right now.
Oh,
Yeah.
dear.
Maybe we should wear T-shirts of him. Get back in his favor or something. Yeah. So anyway, before we went to the break, we briefly touched upon the whole idea of UFOs and whether we've been taken over and things like that. And I think we got to the point where we're discussing, we're on a knife edge. We're going to either go into a heavenly realm as we all kind of ascend, or we're all going to go into this dismal hell of control and everything like that. And I think, Mark, you were going to give us some insights yourself of your take on it. Is that right?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of different ways to look at that. A lot of it, if you really stop to think about it, and Andy, you might be more up on this concept. I'm not sure. I don't want to assume anything. The idea of what we in our minds create. And there's the term create your own reality. And a lot of that, people misunderstand what that means. But if you're somebody who looks at everything positively or looks in the good, then you know what? Usually the better things happen in your life, or you can manifest more positive things. If you're a very negative person, you could be getting hit with all sorts of negative things. And you're going, why me? Why is this happening? Well, is it your attitude creating it? But the same can also be said of, let's say you die, you shed this mortal coil, and where's your brain going to put you? Where are you going to go? Could you go to the heaven? Could you go to hell? And I think all of those concepts are creations of the mind anyway, because what's really waiting for us is far different and stranger, and it's almost incomprehensible to our minds. Now, we've had the opportunity to interview a lot of people who've had near-death experiences and some of the things that they've seen, and some people have had very positive experiences. If they're very religious, they might meet Jesus, if they're very Christian. Or I interviewed a gentleman one time who had a very negative experience there, that he went to hell in his near-death experience, and it scared the crap out of him. But you know what? When he came out of it, he changed his life. And I think a lot of it, what we experience when we go over, when we first cross over, has a lot to do with our own attitudes and expectations, until eventually we acclimate, kind of come back into our totality of our higher self, as you mentioned, Neil, because what we're experiencing right now is just a filament, a tendril that's coming out of the higher self that's coming down into this life and this dimension. Some of the stranger concepts that I've learned to accept more in these last few years that I struggled with is the idea of multiple realities happening at once. We could be living multiple lives at this exact same time we're living in this one. Things are not so linear. We talked earlier about the idea of all time happening at once. If that's the case, then all of our past lives and future lives are all happening at the same time as well. So I start to liken it as our higher self, or that piece of the God self, however you would like to call it. Think of it as like a sea urchin or something, with all these little spikes or tendrils sticking out of it, and each one is sticking out and going into another lifetime or another dimension, and living out and having those experiences, all the while another tendril's going this way, another one's going this way, and they're all going out and having all of these experiences at the same time. Whitley Strieber had mentioned in one of his books, and when I got to talk to him once, about the fact that he had visions during his meditation experiences of him living several different lifetimes. I mean, simultaneously to this one, with he and his wife in different situations. One, they were very poor, living in like basically a shack, but they had each other. Another one, he was living all alone, and this is back when he was still married, but he was living all alone, a very lonely existence. Other existences were more positive. So we could be living not only multiple different lives, like past lives, future lives, but various versions of this life. I'll mention something that happened once with Irene. Is she's had a couple of times when we've talked where she admitted that she has had interactions with different versions of me. One version of where I don't smoke at all. I don't smoke, never have smoked. Yet in this version, I smoke.
When she says versions, does she mean this is going to get complicated? In a dream state, in a different reality that is physical? What does she mean by that?
I think she phases in and out of realities sometimes based on, her lifelong experiences and training, and she works as a remote viewer, and she's had, she's grown up with these abilities, and I think. Because there are times when I'm talking with her, I'll notice a shift, and sometimes I'm not exactly talking to her.
Right.
Those times are very interesting.
What do you think you're talking to when it's not her?
I want to be careful. I know she's very private, so,
She'll be listening intently. Go on, Mark. What are you talking about?
Let's just say that every now and then something or somebody else comes through. And
Spirit guide?
It could be.
Could be a spirit guide, alternative self or higher self, maybe. I think we lost Mark there briefly.
That's Mark.
He'll come back in a second.
It's always on the clincher, isn't it? It's always
yeah. Here he is. He's back.
Yeah. Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Again, Mark, it cut out.
Yeah, we lost you a bit.
You know what? That they're trying to keep me from talking too much. I'll just leave it as I've been given some advice. I've even been scolded for having certain thought patterns, especially in this last year when things are crazy. It's weird when it happens and she doesn't remember it. I'll tell her about it later. She goes, what happened? I don't remember that. So yeah, but I think, it's that ability to shift into these slightly alternate realities, which are all happening at the same time. And that's where the idea of time and the idea of our reality starts getting really wonky. And it's really hard to wrap your head around.
Talking of that, Mark, I'm going to plug another show, which I absolutely love. Have you heard of The Confessionals at all?
No, I have not.
So it's a really good one. It's a guy called Tony Merkel who does them. And he's interviewing all sorts of guests, and very much during the lockdown period, people have been witnessing some proper weird stuff. So we're talking Sasquatch, we're talking the rakes and the wraiths, we're talking kind of demon-eyed dogs, winged bat creatures. It seems during lockdown, something is going on where all of the weirdness is properly coming to a head. And I don't know about you, but I'm kind of slightly pointing or edging towards the Hadron Collider and what CERN is getting up to. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
It could be, that's a possibility. I know that there's been some research lately where certain hotspots, and this is kind of where the focus of what my interests have shifted greatly, where I'm looking more not only into the ufology aspect of reality, not just UFOs, but that whole high strangeness to certain locations on the Earth, which exhibit all sorts of different overlapping paranormal phenomenon. And with what you're mentioning, doesn't surprise me, because most people think, if you think there's ghosts, there's ghosts. You think there's UFOs or Bigfoot, they're all separate phenomenon. When there's a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
Because everything is interconnected. Everything has an interdimensional quality to it.
Yeah.
Bigfoot encounters. I've interviewed, I have friends who go out and hunt Bigfoot, and they think they've had sightings before, and they think it's just an undiscovered hominid. And yet other people had experiences that there's a very high paranormal aspect to it. People have seen UFOs and have seen Bigfoots associated with that. Or the 1 minute it'll be there, next minute it's gone. Where did it go? Coming in and out of our dimension? I don't know. So whether or not it has anything to do with government programs, or maybe with everybody being in lockdown, maybe it's helping our own intuition, our own psyches to become more tuned, getting away from the noise of the outside world, having to win more and it's raising that vibration where we're experiencing these things more.
You're right with the UFO connection with the Sasquatch, because I've noticed patterns. I used to think many years ago Bigfoot thing was just a load of crazy hillbillies looking in the woods, mountain men, looking for Sasquatch, and it was a bit of a joke thing. But the more I listen to people who swear blind, they're not mistaking this for kind of monkeys escaped from zoos. These are kind of 8, 9, 10 foot giant hairy beasts that they've come across. And I tell you what the patterns I've noticed. Number one, UFOs very much accompany this. Number two, as you say, they sometimes seem to appear and disappear. Like they'll be in one spot and then they'll move downstream and there'll be another spot. And another thing, the witnesses that actually talk about it, they tend to get very emotional. But they kind of like stop and kind of like can't carry on. They have to kind of compose themselves to carry on. And they'll always say, I would never want to see that again. I do not want to go looking for it. I'm worried about hunting now. I never want to see it again. So there's consistent patterns of more than one people, quite a few people who have seen these things. Something is going on.
Well, I'll tell you one story. There's a friend of mine. I haven't talked to him in a few years, but I've had him on my radio show. His name is Tim Stover, and he runs, he's out of Ohio. He runs Ohio Bigfoot Hunters. Now, he had a sighting, now I'm going to say about 25 years ago, where he was deer hunting and he was up in a tree stand where, if you understand that type of hunting, the hunters just stay hidden above ground in the tree stand waiting for deer to come by. And he was sitting in this tree stand and it was just becoming dawn, and a movement caught his eye and he turned to look, and 40 yards away from him, standing there, was this big, hairy creature. And he said it was the ugliest thing he's ever seen in his life. And he just stood there. The creature was standing there kind of looking around. It did not seem to be aware of him up in the tree stand. So he was just frozen. He watched this thing for about a minute or two as it stood there. And he was wondering, is this a man in a costume? What's going on with it? He wasn't sure what it was. Then he said it turned to walk away, and that's when he really started to get scared, because he saw the muscles underneath the hair. Yeah, the way the hair was matted and moving. He goes, "This was no guy in a costume. Yeah. This is a living creature." And he spent almost every day going out there whenever the weather is fine, going out every day looking for it again, trying to find it, doing his research. A couple of times I think he's caught some stuff, but then there was this one time a few years ago where he was experiencing paranormal things out in the woods. Now, you hear about people seeing lights out in the woods. Yeah. Well, he shoots everything on video. He has a YouTube channel where whenever he goes out, he puts it on YouTube. He shoots with thermal imaging and night vision and all sorts of things. Well, he went out one night and he turned the camera on himself, and he's filming with his girlfriend at the time, and they're talking. And as they're talking, this ball of light moves behind him, and it's not a bug or an insect because it's too far away from the camera, and it goes behind a tree that looks like it's about 10, 15 yards behind him. So it's obviously not a speck of dust. And it weaves in and out of the trees as it moves along, which I thought was very intriguing. Now, he's not a paranormal guy at all. He doesn't know what to think of the paranormal. He thinks Bigfoot's a real creature, but yet this light appeared. Then about a week or so later, I'm in the store in local Walmart with my wife, and all of a sudden he calls me, and he calls me from the middle of the woods. It's dark in the middle of the woods, and he is freaking out. And he goes, "Mark, I had to call you right away. Good thing you had cell phone service out there." He goes, "I just saw something and I don't know what it was." I go, "Okay, well, tell me what you experienced." And he goes, as he was walking through the woods, this ball of light about the size of a soccer ball drifted out of the woods and drifted up and floated right in front of his face a few feet away. And stayed there. And I asked him, I go, "Well, how did you feel when that happened?" Because he didn't think about it. He goes, "Now you think about it," he goes, "I was very calm. I didn't feel anything at all. I mean, it felt very calm and peaceful." But then after about 30 seconds of this thing floating in front of him, he remembered his cell phone. So he reached down to grab his cell phone to get a picture of it, and it just, boom, vanished. That's when he got scared. That's when the fear came rushing in. The calm was gone, and he called me up kind of in a panic about it. Again, these balls of light have been seen around areas where there's Bigfoot activity.
Yeah.
They've also been sighted in areas where there's high UFO activity, where not only were metallic craft are sighted, but these balls of energy. One case that I've always been very fascinated in, and we have a new television program that's on right now over here in the States, is the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. 25 years ago, when the one family first purchased the ranch, they had all sorts of activity happening, and a lot of it was fairly negative, and it was like they were trying to be driven out of the property. They saw UFOs on the property, metal. One looked like a big metal refrigerator. They chased across the property. Others were these balls of light. There was one ball of light where 3 of his dogs chased after it into the woods, and all of a sudden the dog started screaming, and then it was silent. And because it was night, he waited till the next morning to go out in the woods, and he found 3 piles of goo where the dogs used to be. He killed the dogs. And he had cattle mutilations and poltergeist activity and whatever. And they lasted 2 years until Robert Bigelow, who owns Bigelow Aerospace, and he bought the ranch, and he brought in his own scientific team, NIDS, National Institute of Discovery Science. And they spent 20 years investigating this ranch, trying to investigate. He has a very big fascination with UFOs and the paranormal. And yet after 20 years of investigating, he never released his findings to the public. He kept it all to himself. One of his investigators came out with a local journalist out of Las Vegas, George Knapp, and they wrote a book called Hunt for the Skinwalker, which is when I first heard about the ranch. Fascinating stuff. They not only talk about that ranch, but they talk about other ranches and locations around the country that also have these experiences of high strangeness. These balls of light play a very key role in it because there's an intelligence behind them, sometimes a malevolent intelligence. One time, a couple of the NIDS investigators were up on the ridge over the ranch, and they saw these balls of light, and all of a sudden one of the investigators, who was a PhD, started freaking out because he got a very clear message in his mind saying, "We are watching you." So, who watches the watchers?
Yeah. One thing that disturbs me, Neil, do you remember talking about somebody that was talking about the mysterious disappearances of people in national parks in America? Thousands of people disappear every year in America in national parks.
David Paulides, who wrote a series of books called Missing 411. And then there's also Stephanie Young, out of the UK. She's written a bunch of series of books about people going missing in the woods and other types of phenomenon. But that happened. Yeah, that's a big thing where the National Park Service claims they don't keep records of people who disappear in their parks, which I don't believe for a second. But yeah, very famous cases of people who've disappeared. There's the Todd Seas case, where this guy went out on his ATV and didn't come back, and then they found him a few days later dead, but he wasn't decomposing. He had supposedly enough cocaine in his system that would have killed 10 horses. It was not natural. The way they found his body and everything, it was in an area that was previously searched. And it's a very mysterious case. And another one, a little boy disappeared with his family while in the woods and was gone for a week or so. They found him 5 miles away on top of a mountain 10,000 feet high.
Wow.
There's no way that child could have gotten up there, but yet somehow he did. I mean, he was dead, of course. But
was he mutilated or anything like?
No.
Nothing like the cattle. Because there's cases about human mutilation.
Yeah, one was found up a tree, Neil. Do you remember that? I think it was a homeless man.
No, I can't
was
remember
found-
that specific
literally
story.
found up a tree, and he was mutilated, and that's kind of like one of the biggest kind of like dark secrets of the
Yeah.
cattle mutilation thing,
Yeah.
is that it's not just cattle, it can be humans as well.
Yeah.
I've heard about human mutilations. I've seen some pictures of that look disturbing. I don't know if they're legitimate pictures or not. It doesn't happen as often as cattle mutilations or animal mutilations. Now, there's another guy here in the U.S. Living outside of Phoenix in what's called the Rainbow Valley. It's about 45 minutes southwest of Phoenix. He owns a small ranch called the Stardust Ranch, and he's owned it for about 25 years or so. He and his wife bought it. And the activity that's going on at that ranch is, in my opinion, more intense and negative than what's going on at the Skinwalker Ranch.
Wow.
And he's had numerous investigators out there. Ghost Adventures actually came out and shot an episode there. And they caught a lot of weird stuff while they were there. UFOs flying overhead to things moving around inside the house. And but he's had so much negative. He's had negative gray activity in there where they tried abducting his wife. And one time things were getting he was so intense, he was putting weapons around the house like guns and baseball bats and samurai sword that he had. And one night he woke up and found his wife floating out of the room, and he runs after her, and she goes outside the house, and there's a big spaceship, and they're trying to float her up into the spaceship. So he grabs an AK-47 and unloads 2 clips into it until it drops her and lets her go. And she wound up getting really sick from it, from bad burns and whatnot. They've had encounters in the house where he claims that he has killed several of these grays with he has this samurai sword that he's used. And it sounds fantastic. It sounds almost like BS, but when you listen to the story and how him talking about it, it's very compelling. And he says what's strange is when you ask him, well, what happens to the bodies? What'd you do with the gray bodies? He goes, they disappear if you don't take the head. Just vanish in a puff of smoke. But he did get one where he had tissue, and he sent it off to a lab to get examined. And the scientists at the lab who examined it found that it had a lot of plant qualities. There were chlorophyll and other qualities, along with not exactly humanoid, but different types of animal qualities to it. But the chlorophyll aspect is what was really intriguing. Of course, about a year after the scientist examined the samples, he died.
Yes, how convenient. Now you mentioned getting the head, so it suggests for him to find that out, he must have at least got the head off one of them. And has got it in the fridge or something.
He's hinted that he has some evidence stored, but he's also been harassed. He's been harassed by men in black, and he's been trying to sell the ranch. But I also could tell he has a fascination with it, or like a compulsion where it's hard for him to leave. His wife wanted to leave from day one. She never liked the ranch. He has his book out about his experiences. I think it's just called The Stardust Ranch. And, she never liked it from the very beginning. But he has always said, well, nobody's going to run us off and he's going to fight it. Well, now he's trying to get out of there because it keeps happening. Just a couple of days ago, he had poltergeist activity where he was making some soup in the kitchen and something picked up the bowl and threw the hot soup in his face.
Crikey.
And
are there any military bases nearby, or any kind of Native American burial sites or anything nearby?
Well, being out in the middle of Arizona, maybe there's some Native American stuff. There's a lot of evidence that whatever is happening is underground. They see UFOs in the sky, but it seems like there's a lot of underground activity. There's a lot of electromagnetic activity. One of the things I've been impressed with this television show that's now investigating the Skinwalker Ranch is they brought in scientists with a lot of spectroanalyzing equipment, and they've measured extremely high radiation and electromagnetic frequencies on the ranch, to the point where at some points they've measured dangerously high levels of radiation and gamma radiation. One of the scientists, he opened up an old well near one of the old homesteads, and all of a sudden his radiation meter went off. He got blasted by some gamma radiation to the point where he got sick, had to go to the hospital, and he got burns in his face and his hands, radiation burns.
What the hell is going on?
It's really crazy. They had an episode last week where they had I forget exactly what it was called, but they had something that was measuring all the entire spectrum of radio frequencies, and something was broadcasting super high on all frequencies at once. And it was hitting them with so much EM interference. One of the guys got a bad headache and had to leave the ranch because he had been hurt before, and he had to go to the hospital where he had his fluid on his head that separated his scalp from his skull, and he almost died. And then the other investigator who originally got the radiation burns, he's watching this analyzer and he's commenting on it, and all of a sudden he starts slurring his words, and his mind blanks out for a minute, and it started to affect him.
Bloody hell.
So, and they've had cattle mutilations as well, and seeing the UFOs, they were shooting off. They were able to triangulate some high EMF readings that turned out to be coming 5,000 feet or a mile up in the air.
I was about to say, Mark, if we're going along the lines of this new world order and this control grid and this crazy psychotic demonic force that's in charge, we then need to talk about 5G, and we need to talk about things like Starlink and Elon Musk's 5G satellites beaming stuff down. What if these ranches are kind of like microcosms of what is a bigger global plan? This is my concern.
Well, you don't really hear too much about these other ranches. The Skinwalker is the one everybody knows. Stardust, a lot of people don't know about it, even though he's been public and talking about it for about the last 5 years. He was quiet for the first 20 years, and then he went public with it. And then in the book Hunt for the Skinwalker, they mention briefly about several other ranches across the country that has activity. On a positive side, there's one up in Washington State, the Gilliland Ranch, where people go there all the time. It's that they're having positive interactions with UFOs, kind of like the ESETI CE5 things that Stephen Greer.
So there could be different factions. There could be some highly negative ones and some highly positive ones in different areas.
Yeah, I know what John's dealing with is highly negative. I think what's at the Skinwalker Ranch is, I don't know if I would call it super negative, but it has a trickster element to it. And this is where Native American lore comes in, because in most Native American folklore, there isn't good and evil. I mean, heck, you can even look at the old gods from in Greece and Roman times, or even in the Viking gods, Thor and Odin. There's always a trickster element. In the Norse mythology, you have Loki, who is the trickster god. In Native American culture, they have Coyote, which is known as the trickster. And it's not necessarily evil. It's not necessarily good. It does certain things that can seem bad. Other times it messes with you. I mean, in both locations, they talk about things. You set something down, turn around, and then it's gone, and then it reappears a week later. Car keys, TV remotes. I think one of the more disturbing things that John experienced at the Stardust Ranch was one time he was waiting for his wife to get ready. They were going to go out for dinner and get off the ranch for a while, because whenever they leave the ranch, they feel better. And he was waiting for her to get ready in the bathroom. And then finally she comes out. So they get in the car, they have a nice conversation, they go to the restaurant, they're sitting there talking. And then at one point she gets up and excuses herself to go into the bathroom. Then his phone rings and he picks up the phone and his wife's at home screaming at him, why did you leave me? Where are you? It's like, who the hell was he just with? The thing that looked like his wife came back to the table. And then he said he realized up at that point, he never really looked her in the face. He was always looking at the side or talking, not looking at her or whatnot. And then he looked at her face and saw her eyes were all black.
Wow.
And he just like instantly got up and got out of there and went straight home. And there's his wife there waiting for him, crying, totally upset. So it's kind of doppelganger effect.
Hope she paid the bill.
No, he didn't. He just got out of there. But talk about a trickster type of event. What's the purpose behind that? Is it psychological? Is it, feeding off somebody's energy? I mean, you hear stories of the black-eyed kids that show up at people's houses wanting in. It's like they can't enter unless you invite them in. It's almost like the old vampire lore.
Anything black-eyed, like the only stories I've ever heard about the black-eyed stuff has been entirely negative and malevolent. They're not good. They're not good at all.
Yeah, I've heard one account of somebody who actually let black-eyed kids into their house.
What happened?
I believe, I don't know if this was in one of Nick Redfern's books or there was the other gentleman who, I forget his name, who originally started the black-eyed kid phenomenon, talking about it anyway, where the kids usually come up, they're like younger kids or early teenagers, and they say, yeah, we're lost, can we use your phone to call our moms to come get us or something. They always have a story where they're trying to get into the house. One time supposedly this guy let them into the house and he said, yeah, the phone's over there, and the kids were just standing there staring at him, and then one of the kids says, we've come to collect you. Well, the guy turned, ran, practically broke down his back door running out of the house. But the kids disappeared. I mean, there are other accounts of people who have been in their cars and the kids walk up to the cars and tap on the window and talking to them, can you give me a ride? And just, you just wonder, it's obviously a very negative, nefarious purpose, but then you don't know what the end result is really going to be. Now, could it be what we mentioned earlier, people who are disappearing, especially in the national parks? Now, how are they disappearing? Is it they go through a time portal? They slip into a different dimension. You hear stories of people who have time slips where there's that famous case of the women back in the 50s in France who were walking down the street, and the next thing they know, everything just kind of shifted and changed, and they look around and everyone's in outfits going back to the Napoleon days.
Yeah.
And this lasted for a few minutes before they switched back. So
maybe the black-eyed kids could be hybrids because they've got black eyes like the alien greys. That people have said that they see kids on the ships that are half grey and half human, and maybe this is what's happening to them. They're homesick.
Well, it could have been leading into an abduction phenomenon. I mean, I know that in a lot of UFO lore and abduction lore, these beings are able to affect our perception of them. They can look one way, but then suddenly they look a completely different way. I've read stories of one woman who was abducted, and there was this being who looked very humanoid, but she felt that it wasn't its true form, and then it changed and it turned more like the gray alien. So when I hear stories of, like, let's say the Nordics, which are supposed to be these tall, beautiful, white-looking people from Scandinavia, is that what they really look like? Or is it some type of a screen memory, or they're messing with the person's mind enough to project that image? Mike Cleland, who wrote this book, The Messengers, which talks a lot about owl imagery and how people who have had UFO experiences see owls in various situations. A lot of them seeing like a 4-foot tall owl standing in the middle of the road. Well, there are no 4-foot tall owls. But owls have that, with the big eyes. It's a screen memory for alien UFO activity.
I had many years ago some strange experiences with owl women coming to visit my house, all to do with the birth of my daughter. And my then wife had a miscarriage, and she swore blind that this woman who was half owl and half human flew through the wall with its feathers of its wings brushing across her face, which is what woke her up. And she saw it and saw it screeching, and it passed over her head and out through the bedroom wall. And I woke up thinking, well, it must have been a bad dream or something. So we looked through all these books the next day on our shelves, and the only books that kind of suggested something were all these pagan books, and they talked about this goddess Hecate who comes to take the souls of children back to the spirit world. And my then wife had not long had a miscarriage, you see, and so she wondered if that was something connected with it. And so about a year later, my then wife got pregnant again, and she was really worried about having another miscarriage. And I said, no, it's actually absolutely going to be fine. And she goes, how do you know? I said, well, I had this dream. And in the dream, I was walking with her in the woods, and I saw an owl in the tree that looked to be injured. And so I flew up to the tree, as you can do in dreams. I took the owl down. I said, I'm going to take this owl to the vets in the dream. Took it to the vets. I said, can you fix my owl? And he said, yeah, I'll see what I can do. And he did something. He says, I'll give it a test flight. And he said he flew out the window of the vets straight into the beak of an albatross, which promptly swallowed it whole. And went, oh my God, my owl, it's gone, it's gone. So I rushed up to the albatross, plucked out what I thought was the owl out of his jaws, and out just came a couple of feathers. The owl had gone. And I was walking home really despondent in the dream, thinking, that's it, my owl's gone. And then this owl came and landed on my shoulder in the dream. And I thought, oh, my owl's back. And then something just clicked that says, no, this is a sister of the first owl. And then at that point, me and this owl took off into the night sky, flew like the snowman story with the little boy and the snowman over this village. And I was looking down at churchyards and things like that. And I was flying with this owl, and I felt really spiritually happy. And that told me everything. The baby that was going to be born was this new owl that came along, and the owl that was injured went back to its greater self. That was the miscarriage. Now, in Italy, they have this thing called Hecate's Day, which they celebrate this owl. And it happens to be on August the 15th, which happened to be the date of my daughter's birthday, that when she was actually born, to do with this owl thing on August the 15th. And on the day that she was born, she was induced by the hospital. And my wife had the baby, and she was brought up to the next room. But she said, "Oh God, I've left some stuff down in the delivery room. Can you go down and get it?" And I said, "Yeah, okay then." So we were starting to get really weird owl coincidences. So I ran down the stairs of the hospital to the delivery room, and as I passed down the stairs, I passed a couple coming up the stairs, and it was this very heavily pregnant lady with her partner. And she just happened to say, as I was going past her, "When are we going to see your friend that's got that pet barn owl?" And I thought, oh my God, here we go again, some freaky owl stuff. And then some friends of ours came to see my daughter a few days later in the hospital, and they knew nothing of these owl experiences. And they got something wrapped up in tissue papers. They said, "Here's a little gift for your baby." And we unwrapped it, and it was a candle in the shape of a bloody barn owl. I was like, oh my God, here we go again. And then, so as my daughter got older, we told her this story that, she came from this barn owl kind of Hecate person. And about 4 years later, we was on holiday in Devon in the West Country of the UK, and we were camping. Now, no one knew this, but my wife was then pregnant again. And my daughter was 4 years old, and my wife had gone off to have a shower at the campsite toilets, and I was washing up our tea, and my daughter was very young. She was just playing around me, and then suddenly she hid under my legs and got really scared. And she goes, Daddy, I'm really scared. I said, "Why are you scared?" And she goes, "I can see Hecate over there in the woods." And I looked, and I couldn't see anything. I said, "Well, what does she look like?" She goes, "Oh, she's got an owl face and really scary eyes." And I said, "Oh." And I thought, shit, what do I say? So I said, "Oh, maybe she's just come to see if we're having a nice holiday." And she goes, oh, she's gone now. So I said, oh, that's okay then. Now, remember, this owl figure was showing up every time there was like taking a soul of a dead person back to the spirit world. And when my wife came back from the showers, I told her this story quietly. I said, you never guess what? Morgan has seen this owl figure again. She goes, oh my God. And then the very next day on holiday, my wife suffered another miscarriage. So it all kind of tied in, I thought anyway. So
very strange.
Very, very weird. I mean, I don't think it was anything to do with aliens, but it's just very bizarre owl connections. And I've told this story to a few people, and other people said, oh my God, I've had similar things,
You know, what you're describing almost sounds in a way like Mothman.
Yeah.
It could be that as well. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of strangeness around it. And again, there's a lot of owl imagery. Even, Native Americans, a lot of Native American cultures, they have owl imagery as like owls being messengers from the spirit world, that type of thing. So, very interesting.
Yeah. And talking, if we go back to the Sasquatch side, has anyone heard of Albert Ostman?
Yes, very.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to tell the story, Mark, if you remember it, or I can tell it if you can't?
Well, with Albert Ostman back in
1928, was it?
20 something? 24, I think it was. He was camping. He was an outdoorsman camping, and something was coming into his camp at night, messing with his camp, and then he was in a sleeping bag, and something grabbed him in his sleeping bag, and something big threw it over his shoulder, walked several hours through the woods, and then dumped him out. And he was in this area where there was a family of Bigfoot, and he lived with the Bigfoots for, he says, about
a week.
Yeah, he detailed this story, but he tried to leave a couple of times, but the big one that he called the old man, because there was two adults, male and female, and then two young ones, male and female. And the male wouldn't let him leave. So, they wouldn't let him leave. And then finally, he had snuff, which was popular in the day, and he was taking a pinch of snuff, and the male Bigfoot was interested in it and grabbed it and dumped the whole thing in his mouth. And then had a bad reaction to it. And when he was incapacitated, that's when he was able to run off and run all the way out to the woods.
Yeah. And he kept his story quiet for about 30 years, didn't he? It's only when he started reading articles appearing in various magazines that he thought, well, maybe he better come forward and tell his story.
Yeah, it was around the same year that Fred Beck and the other miners up in Oregon in Ape Canyon, where they supposedly shot a Bigfoot creature that fell into the canyon, hence how it got its name. And then that night in the cabin, they were attacked by several of these Bigfoots that were trying to get into the cabin, throwing rocks at it all night, trying to come through the roof. They were shooting through the roof. It was a big siege until the next morning when everything quieted down and they were able to get out of there.
Wow. Did they get any body of a Bigfoot if they shot it in the canyon?
It fell into the canyon, is what they said. But it obviously ticked off the other Bigfoot, and they came out looking for some payback.
Yeah. Because Albert Ostman, he kept the story the whole time super secret until he started reading about articles. So he decided then to publicize it or to tell people. And he was interviewed by like a sheriff or ranger or someone like that, who absolutely said, I believe everything the way he's saying it. He's just so genuine in his story about this sightings of these Bigfoot and his experiences. And he'd never changed it or anything like that. And it's quite an amazing account, really. He survived, and they were just curious about him for whatever reason.
Right.
Interesting that they would actually take him all the way back to camp, because you'd think they just wouldn't have anything to do with humans, and here they are taking him right back to camp for their little party or something,
Neil, your story, going back to the owl thing, where was it that it happened?
The original bit or the latter bit?
Where your other half saw an owl.
Okay, an owl lady. That was in Buckinghamshire.
Okay,
where we lived. Yeah, in Buckinghamshire. Yeah, and then we had the second. Then I had the owl dream again in Buckinghamshire, maybe a year later. and then my daughter had the owl Hecate experience about 3.5 to 4 years later, something like that.
The reason I'm asking, as you were talking, I was doing a search for owl symbolism. In Native American culture, they're a symbol of death, actually, and hearing owls hooting is considered unlucky, and they warn children to stay inside and not cry too much, otherwise the owl might come and carry them away.
Yeah, you see, it kind of ties in a little bit with the whole thing. This
Well,
Hecate one.
But I had a dream once. This was not long after my brother passed away, and in the dream, my brother was there, but he was off to the side, watching, and then in front of me was this little owl. I've never dreamed of owls before. Yeah, it was this little brown. I think I looked the owl up and I found the species, and I just can't remember what it was. But it's a small owl, maybe a foot tall, with brownish and whitish feathers, and it had like a little mark on its chest that almost formed like a heart. But it was just sitting there staring at me. But it was like a real pleasant, positive feeling. Like communing with this owl for whatever reason, while my brother was sitting over there kind of watching what was going on. That's all I really remember of the dream, but it wasn't negative in any way.
Well, in actual fact, it depends where you go in the world, because literally coming across owl symbolism, there's a website I came across where there's so many different versions of it, some positive, some negative. I'll see if I can come across the website. So yes, so in Native American, some Native American belief systems it's negative, but in some other belief systems it's actually quite positive. So I wouldn't see it always as a negative creature or negative symbolism. And I actually quite like owls. So locally to here, Mark, there's quite a few kind of open fairs and festivals and things like that where they have bird sanctuaries and rescue sanctuaries, and when I come across owls, absolutely love them. I think they're beautiful creatures.
And as I said, we found reference to it in these pagan books, and they called it Hecate, who is a goddess of the underworld, and she comes in the form of a barn owl. If anyone remembers that film Clash of the Titans, they had a little mechanical owl in that, and they called that Hecate. So they obviously based that on that kind of legends and things. Anyway, we are now bringing ourselves to the end of the show because we've only got about a minute or two left. So I think it's Tommy wound up, but I think, Mark, if you want to tell us more about the Paranormal Radio Network and any other things you've got happening, it'd be a good opportunity to tell us now as we're in the final minutes of the show.
Well, obviously, people who are listening to this on the podcast know where to find us. I mean, our podcasts with Paranormal Peep Show, the Paranormal UK Radio Show, and all of our other shows are available through Spreaker, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Samsung Podcasts. If there's a podcast, we're out on it. Plus our streaming radio service on our website, paukradio.com. And of course, the show I do with Irene is every Wednesday, the Paranormal UK Radio Show. Then we're weekly. So tune in. And guys, it's been really wonderful chatting with both of you.
Brilliant.
It's great.
Yeah,
it's great being on this end for a change.
Yeah, well, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's been an honor to have you. It's been really, really interesting. I've learned lots of new things, and hopefully our discussion is likewise. You learned lots of things about owls and stuff from me, which I don't often talk about that story, but now and again it requires to be told. Andy, what have you got coming up? Anything you want to promote?
Just quickly, I'll say I came across the website with the owls thing, owlpages.com. If you go to Owl Pages, you can see a whole mythology of all over the world of what the owls are, some positive, some negative. In terms of things coming up for me, not a lot really. So the event situation, my psychic fairs and stuff is kind of on hold. The irony is not lost on me. You have to be psychic to work out when to do them. But I'm going to go with my gut feeling, and I don't think this lockdown situation is fully sorted, despite Boris's promises. I think there's going to be a lot of hoo-ha. So I'm going to be aiming for autumn for those. Therefore, everything's on kind of hold till autumn. But we do online readings. So if anyone is looking for psychic reading online, go to Tuned In Events on the Facebook groups. Also join Paranormal Peep Show and Paranormal Radio UK on Facebook as well. And please do hop onto Sky and other kind of broadcasters and have a look at GB News, Great Britain News, because it is anti-woke, anti-far left and pro-freedom of speech, which is what we need right now.
And I would second that with UK column news as well, which is something I watch regularly. So that's a good one to find out about jibby jabs and all that sort of nasty stuff that people are trying to give us for the benefit of humankind, to turn us all into owl people, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, squawk. Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and join us next month. But, stay tuned. Look for the skies, and also look for anything coming through your window or even up through the floorboards. This is Neil and Andy and Mark on the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Good night.
See you later.
Take care.